talk about converting fractions to decimals, decimals to percents, percents to decimals, percents to fractions, decimals to fractions. You can do this to compare fractions, and this is the second method of comparing fractions, and that's by converting them to decimals before you compare. For instance, we have 5/8 and 7/10, and I'm going to show you how we can convert those to decimals. I have a little song I like to sing, or a little chant, and it goes like this to help you remember. To change a fraction to a decimal, divide the numerator by the denominator. Okay, so that means the numerator divided by the denominator. That's what this bar means, is divide. So I have 5 divided by 8. I have to add a decimal and a 0, and 8 goes into 50 6 times. 8 times 6 is 48. 50 minus 48 is 2. And I'm going to add another 0 here because doesn't end up in having no remainder, so I have to add a 0, bring it down. 8 goes into 20 twice. 8 times 2 is 16. 20 minus 16 is 4. As long as I have a remainder here, or I have something left over, I have to add a 0 and bring it down. So let's keep doing that. 8 goes into 40 5 times, and now I know that I'm finished. So 5/8 as a decimal is 625 thousandths. That's how I would say that. Now, a fraction like 7/10, well listen, 7/10 is exactly how it sounds. 7/10. So that one, you don't have to divide the numerator by the denominator, but if you did, you'd get the same answer. Once I have changed my fractions to decimals, I can compare them. There's a 6 in the tenths place and a 7 in the tenths place, and already I can tell that this is the larger value. If you need to add these zeros here, so you can compare 625 thousandths to 700 thousandths to see that 7/10 is the larger fraction. So 5/8 is less than 7/10. Now, sometimes when we convert a fraction to a decimal, we get a repeating decimal. Look at 2/3. I have 2 divided by 3. I didn't write that correctly. 2 divided by 3, and I had to add a decimal and a 0, bring my decimal straight up. 3 goes into 20 6 times. 3 times 6 is 18. 20 minus 18 is 2. There's leftover, so I have to add a 0 and bring it down again. 3 goes into 20 6 times. 3 times 6 is 18, excuse me. 20 minus 18 is 2. Add a 0, bring it down. 3 goes into 20 6 times, and so forth. And so I notice that I have a repeating decimal. The way that I can write that is just 0.6 with just a bar over with a digit or digits that repeat. In this case, it's one digit that repeats itself all the time. So 2/3 is equal to 0.6 repeating as a decimal. Now let's talk about changing a decimal to a fraction. I have a chant for that. This one's more of a cheer. Wish I had some pom-poms, because it goes like this. Read it, write it, reduce it. Okay, again. Read it, write it, reduce it. In other words, if you can read the decimal properly, you can write it like a fraction. Look here, this is 8/10. So I would write it as 8/10. And then I need to look and see if I can simplify or reduce, and I can. I can divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So 8/10, the decimal, as a fraction, is 4/5. Read it, write it, reduce it. This one says 25 hundredths. And again, to put it in simplest form, I'm going to divide the numerator and the denominator by the greatest common factor. I know 25 goes into both of these. 25 divided by 25 is 1. 100 divided by 25 is 4. And so 25 hundredths is 1/4 the fraction in simplest form. Next, if I have a mixed number here, I do still read it, write it, reduce it. This says 2 and 3/100ths. So I write it like this: 2 and 3/100ths. Now that one can't be simplified, so I'm finished. But notice, if I have a number or a digit to the left of the decimal, it tells me I'm going to either have a whole number or a mixed number for an answer. Now, there's a few ways to convert to percents, and it's important to know that percent actually means by the 100 or out of 100. And so I can come up with a common denominator of 100. Or I can say, as long as this denominator here in the original fraction can go evenly into 100, the denominator, I can figure out percents by setting up what's called a proportion or equivalent fractions. What do I need to multiply 5 by to get 100? Well, 5 times 20 is 100. So 4 times 20 is 80. So 4/5 the fraction is 80% as a percent, because 80 out of 100 means 80%. Let's look at 6/20ths. Again, this one will give me the common, or I can come up with 100 as a denominator because 20 goes evenly into 100. 20 times 5 equals 100. 6 times 5 equals 30. And so 30/100ths means that 6/20ths is equivalent to 30%. 30 out of 100. Doesn't always work that easily. Here's method 2. Sometimes our denominator can't be 100, and so we need to change the fraction to a decimal and then multiply by 100. Now in this case, I could have used the denominator of 100 because 4 goes in, but this works for every fraction, not just some of the time, like coming up with a denominator of 100. Just change your fraction to a decimal. Remember that chant? To change a fraction to a decimal, divide the numerator by the denominator. So again, 3 divided by 4, and when I have to add a decimal and bring it up, 4 goes into 37 times. 4 times 7 is 28. 30 minus 28 is 2. Add a 0, bring it down. 4 goes into 20 5 times. Then I multiply by 100, and here's what happens when I multiply by 100. 100 times 75/100ths, and I make sure my decimals are all worked out correctly, and I get this. But there's a shortcut. I can say that just take this decimal and move it 2 places to the right, because that's what happens when I multiply by 100. It moves my decimal 2 places to the right. So 3/4 as a decimal is 75/100ths, or 75 out of 100, and so it's 75% as a percent. Let's try one more. Let's do 7/8. 7/8. Now, 8 does not go evenly into 100, so I can't come up with a denominator of 100 and work it that way. So I'm going to divide 7 divided by 8. Divide the numerator by the denominator. Add a decimal and a 0. 8 goes into 70 8 times. By the way, bring that decimal up. 8 times 8 is 64. Subtract, add a 0, bring it down. 8 goes into 60 7 times. 8 times 7 is 56. 60 minus 56 is 4. Add a 0, bring it down. 8 goes into 40 5 times. So 7/8 as a decimal is 875 thousandths. And as a percent, it is, move the decimal 2 places to the right. 1, 2, it's 87.5%.